Secretary-in-Chief. Please respond to Senator Rubio.
Well, I heard Hewitt, a nice man. He apologized because he actually said that we had a misunderstanding, and he said today that Donald Trump is maybe the best interview there is anywhere that he's ever done. Now, unless he was just saying that on CNN to be nice, but he did say that.
Oh, you're the best interview in America.
And we had a legitimate misunderstanding in terms of his pronunciation of a word, but I would say just, well, I think it was. And he actually said that. Did you say that?
I said radio makes an interesting thing.
Okay, so I will say this, though. You was giving me name after name, Arab name, and there are few people anywhere that would have known those names. I think he was reading them off a sheet. And frankly, I will have, and I told him, I will have the finest team that anybody's put together, and we will solve a lot of problems. You know, right now, they know a lot, and look at what's happening. The world is blowing up around us. We will have great teams and great people.
Senator
I hope that answers your question. I mean, you are in the Senate, but I hope that answers your question.
Well, it does, but then it's the following way. This is an important question. I think if you're running for president, these are important issues, because look around the world today. There is a lunatic in North Korea with dozens of nuclear weapons and a long-range rocket that can already hit the very place in which we stand tonight. The Chinese are rapidly expanding their military. They hack into our computers. They're building artificial islands in the South China Sea, the most important shipping lane in the world. A gangster in Moscow is not just threatening Europe, he's threatening to destroy and divide NATO. You have radical jihadists in dozens of countries across multiple continents, and they even recruit Americans using social media to try to attack us here at home. And now we've got this horrible deal with Iran where a radical Shia cleric with an apocalyptic vision of the future is also guaranteed to one day possess nuclear weapons and also a long-range rocket that can hit the United States. These are extraordinarily dangerous times that we live in. And the next president of the United States better be someone that understands these issues and has good judgment about them. Because the number one issue that a president will ever confront and the most important obligation that the federal government has is to keep this nation safe. And today, we are not doing that. We are eviscerating our military, and we have a president that is more respectful to the Ayatollah in Iran than he is to the Prime Minister of Israel.
Mr. Trump, Senator Rubio seemed to be suggesting that you don't know information.
No, I don't think he's suggesting that at all. I mean,
Are you, Senator Rubio?
I don't think he's suggesting that.
Well, that's why we have a debate. I think that we should have a deeper debate about these issues because there is no more important decision that a president will make.
But are you saying that you have the knowledge to be the president that Mr. Trump does not have?
Well, you should ask him questions in detail about the foreign policy issues our president will confront because you better be able to lead our country on the first day. Not 6 months from now, not a year from now. On the first day in office, our president could very well confront a national security crisis. You can't predict it. Sometimes you cannot control it. And it is the federal government does all kinds of things it's not supposed to be doing. It regulates bathrooms. It regulates schools that belong to local communities. But the one thing that the federal government must do, the one thing that only the federal government can do is keep us safe. And a president better be up to date on those issues on his first day in office, or on her first day in office.
Mr. Trump.
Well, you have to understand, I am not sitting in the United States Senate with, by the way, the worst voting record there is today, number one. I am not sitting in the United States Senate. I'm a businessman doing business transactions.
Okay.
I am doing business transactions. I will know more about this, and as you said, that was very acceptable. And when you listened to that whole interview, it was a great interview. You said it, I didn't.
Yeah,
well, now I did. But I will, listen, just 1 second.
Well, but he addressed
just 1 second.
I never get addressed, so when I do, I'm going to jump in.
I will know more about the problems of this world by the time I sit. And you look at what's going on in this world right now by people that supposedly know this world is a mess.
Senator Rubio, he did invoke your absentee record in the Senate.
I'm proud to serve in the United States Senate. You know, when I ran 5 years ago, the entire leadership of my party in Washington lined up against me. But I'm glad I won, and I'm glad that I ran, because this country's headed in the wrong direction. And if we keep electing the same people, nothing is going to change. And you're right, I have missed some votes, and I'll tell you why, Mr. Trump. Because in my years in the Senate, I figured out very quickly that the political establishment in Washington, D.C., in both political parties, is completely out of touch with the lives of our people. You have millions of people in this country living paycheck to paycheck, and nothing's being done about it. We are about to leave our children with $18 trillion in debt, and they're about to raise the debt limit again. We have a world that grows increasingly dangerous, and we are eviscerating our military spending and signing deals with Iran. And if this thing continues, we are going to be the first Americans to leave our children worse off than ourselves. That's why I'm missing votes, because I am leaving the Senate. I'm not running for re-election, and I'm running for president because I know this. Unless we have the right president, We cannot make America fulfill its potential, but with the right person in office, the 21st century can be the greatest era that our nation has ever known.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. I want to turn now to Hugh Hewitt.
Thank you, Jake. I've done a lot of great interviews with all of you, but Governor Bush, I talked to you in February about the biggest elephant in a room full of elephants, which is your last name. And you told me that you would not be burdened either by your brother or your father's legacy in the Middle East. And then a week later, you rolled out your list of foreign policy advisors, and it was a lot of the band getting back together again. So on behalf of the military that is watching, okay, the active duty military that are at the end of the spear, what kind of a commander-in-chief is Jeb Bush going to be, and who are the advisors that are new to your team?
Well, first of all, Hugh, if you're looking at Republican advisors, you have to go to the last two administrations that happen to be 41 and 43. So just by definition, if you're, and many of the people here that are seeking advice from the foreign policy experts in the Republican side, they served in my dad's administration, my brother's administration. Of course that's the case. But I'm my own man. I'm going to create a strategy that's based on the simple fact that the United States needs to lead the world. The first thing that we need to do is to stop the craziness of the sequester, rebuild our military so that we don't deploy people over and over again without the necessary equipment to keep them safe, to send a signal to the world that we're serious. If we're going to lead the world, then we need to have the strongest military possible. We need to rebuild our counterintelligence and intelligence capabilities. We need to focus on the fact that the next president's going to start in 2017, not in 1990, 30 years ago, or when my brother started. The world is dramatically different. And I believe that we need to restore America's presence and leadership in the world. Name a country where our relationship is better today than it was the day that Barack Obama got elected president. Under Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, we have seen a weakness that now creates huge problems for the next president of the United States. So I'll have a team that will be following the doctrine that I set up, and it'll be peace through strength. We're sitting here in this library, which is a wonderful place to talk about this, because that's exactly what happened in the 1980s, and the world was a lot safer because of the leadership of Ronald Reagan and my
Trump. I want to ask you a question, though. You've promised us great leaders, and I believe that. But Jeb Bush has laid out 20 different people that have experience around the world. There are 190 countries. You can't run the world by yourself. When are we going to get some names on your military and your foreign policy advisors?
And I'm meeting with people that are terrific people, but I have to say something because it's about judgment. I am the only person on this dais, the only person that fought very, very hard against us, and I wasn't a sitting politician, going into Iraq. Because I said going into Iraq, that was in 2003, you can check it out, I'll give you 25 different stories. In fact, a delegation was sent to my office to see me because I was so vocal about it. I'm a very militaristic person, but you have to know when to use the military. I'm the only person up here that fought against going into Iraq.
Hugh, can I make a response to that?
Just excuse me 1 second, Rand, if you don't mind, Rand. You know, you are on last, you do have your 1%. I would like, and I think it's very important, I think it's important because it's about judgment. It's about judgment. I didn't want to go into Iraq, and I fought it because what I said to you, was you're going to destabilize the Middle East, and that's what happened.
So he's referred to me in his remarks. May I make a response?
Right after me. Go ahead, I'll yield the floor. What do you guys say in the Senate when you're talking and debating?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Here's the facts. When Donald Trump talks about judgment, what was his position on who would have been the best negotiator to deal with Iran? It wasn't a Republican. It was Hillary Clinton. That's what you believe. I mean, the lack of judgment and the lack of understanding about how the world works is really dangerous in this kind of time that we're saying. So is that the judgment that you bring to the table, that Hillary Clinton is a great negotiator, that she could bring about a better
deal with Iran? And your brother's administration gave us Barack Obama because it was such a disaster those last 3 months that Abraham Lincoln couldn't have been elected.
You know what? As it relates to my brother, there's one thing I know for sure. He kept us safe. I don't know if you remember, Donald. You remember the rubble? You remember the firefighter with his arms around it? He sent a clear signal that the United States would be strong and fight Islamic terrorism, and he did keep us safe.
I don't know. You feel safe right now? I don't feel so safe.
And
that's because of Barack. That's because of Barack Obama. That's because of Barack Obama. We've had a president who called ISIS the JB squad, Yemen a success story, Iran a place we can do business with. It's not because of George W. Bush. It's because of Barack Obama.
But Hugh, on that point, though, whether we're talking about national security, foreign policy, or we're talking about domestic policy,
or the collapse of the economy,
the key issue here is talking about leadership. Now, there's a lot of great people up here, and you've heard a lot of great ideas out there. But I would ask the American people, look at who's been tested. When there were 100,000 protesters in my capital, I didn't back down. When they issued death threats against me and threats against my family, I didn't back down. When they tried to recall me, I didn't back down. And when they made me one of their number one targets last year, I didn't back down. Give me the chance to be your president.
Thank you, Governor.
I won't back down on any of these issues.
Senator Paul.
The remark was made that there hadn't been anyone else on the podium opposed to the Iraq War. I've made my career as being an opponent of the Iraq War. I was opposed to the Syrian War. I was opposed to arming people who are our enemies. Iran is now stronger because Hussein is gone. Hussein was the great bulwark and counterbalance to the Iranians. So when we complain about the Iranians, you need to remember that the Iraq War made it worse. Originally, Governor Bush was asked, was the Iraq War a mistake? And he said, no, we'd do it again. We have to learn. Sometimes the interventions backfire. The Iraq War backfired and did not help us. We're still paying the repercussions of a bad decision. We have to make the decision now. In Syria, should we topple Assad? Many up here wanted to topple Assad, and it's like, I said no, because if you do, ISIS will now be in charge.
Thank you, Senator Paul. I understand that Governor Bush's name has been invoked, and then we can go to you, Senator Rubio.
Here's the lessons of history. When we pull back, voids are created. We left Iraq. We should have had a forces agreement to stay there with a small force. And instead of that, we politically and militarily pulled back, and now we have the creation of ISIS. 36 days ago, in this very library, I gave a speech with a comprehensive strategy how to take out ISIS. And it requires American leadership and engagement. We don't have to be the world's policeman, but we certainly have to be the world's leader. We need to make sure that the world knows that we're serious, that we're engaged, that we're not going to pull back, that our word matters. And if we do that, we can create a force that will take out ISIS both in Iraq and in Syria, which will take a lot longer time now because of what President Obama's done by pulling back.
I want to go even deeper, and I want to go even deeper in that direction, because I think the belief that somehow by retreating America makes the world safer has been disproven every single time it's ever been tried. Syria is a perfect example of it. The uprising in Syria was not started by the United States. It was started by the Syrian people. And I warned at the time, this was 3.5 years ago, I openly and repeatedly warned that if we did not find moderate elements on the ground that we could equip and arm, that void would be filled by radical jihadists. Well, the president didn't listen. The administration didn't follow through. And that's exactly what happened. That is why ISIS grew. That is why ISIS then came over the border from Syria and back into Iraq. What is happening in that region is the direct consequence of the inability to lead and of disengagement. And the more we disengage, the more airplanes from Moscow you're going to see flying out of Damascus and out of Syria.
Thank you, Senator.
As you asked earlier today.
Dr. Carson.
I haven't had an opportunity to weigh in on foreign policy, and I just want to mention that when the issue occurred in 2003, I suggested to President Bush that he not go to war. Okay, so I just want that on the record. And, you know, a lot of people are very much against us getting involved right now with global jihadism, and they refer back to our invasion of Iraq, and they seem to think that that was what caused it. What caused it was withdrawing from there and creating a vacuum which allowed this terrible situation to occur. But it's very different from what's going on today. We're talking about global jihadists who actually want to destroy us. They are an existential threat to our nation. And we have to be mature enough to recognize that our children will have no future if we put our heads in the sands. We have to recognize we have two choices. We either allow them to continue to progress and appear to be the winners, or we use every resource available to us to destroy them.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because I want to ask Governor Christie about something else that you have said. Governor Christie, we just marked the 14th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Now, Dr. Carson has said that if he had been president at the time, the United States would not have gone to war in Afghanistan. What does that say to you about how Dr. Carson would respond as president if America were attacked again?
Well, Jake, I was named U.S. Attorney by President Bush on September 10th, 2001. And that next day, my wife, Mary Pat, did what she did every day. She traveled through the World Trade Center and went to her office 2 blocks from the World Trade Center. And after those planes hit for 5.5 hours, after that, I couldn't reach her, didn't know whether she was dead or alive, and we had 3 children at the time, 8, 5, and 1. And I had to confront what so many thousands of others in my region had to confront. The idea that I might become a single parent, the idea that my life and my children's life might be changed forever. We lost friends that day. We went to the funerals. And I will tell you that what those people wanted and what they deserved was for America to answer back against what had been done to them. And I support what President Bush did at that time, going into Afghanistan, hunting al-Qaeda and its leaders, getting its sanctuary out of place, and making it as difficult around the world for them to move people and money. And then he went to prosecutors like us, and he said, never again. Don't prosecute these people after the crime is committed. Intervene before the crime happens. I absolutely believe that what the president did at the time was right, and I am proud to have been one of the people on the stage who was part of making sure that what Governor Bush said before was the truth. America was safe for those 7 years, and Barack Obama has taken that safety away from us.
Dr. Carson.
Well, recognize that, President George W. Bush was a great friend of ours, and we spent many wonderful days at the White House. I haven't been there in the last 7 years. I'd probably have to have a food tester. But at any rate, I didn't suggest that nothing be done. What I suggested to President Bush is to be Kennedy-esque in the sense that when the Russians got ahead of us in the space race, what we did is use the bully pulpit to galvanize everybody, business, industry, academia, behind a national goal to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely. I said, you can do the same kind of thing. Declare that within 5 to 10 years we will become petroleum independent. The moderate Arab states would have been so concerned about that, they would have turned over Osama bin Laden and anybody else you wanted on a silver platter within 2 weeks. There are smart ways to do things, and there are muscular ways to do things, and sometimes you have to look at both of those to come up with the right solution.
Jake, I don't want to say this, Jake, is that while that may have been a fine idea that Dr. Carson had, these people were out to kill us. I stood in that region with my family, and every time a plane went overhead in the weeks after that, people's heads jerked to the sky because they thought it was happening again. You do not need to go through subtle diplomacy at that point. That can be handled later on. What you need is a strong American leader who will take the steps that are necessary to protect our nation. That's what I would do as commander-in-chief in this circumstance, and that's what President George W. Bush did in 2001.
Dr. Carson.
I have no argument with having a strong leader and to be aggressive where aggression is needed. But it's not needed in every circumstance. There is a time when you can use your intellect to come up with other ways to do things, and I think that's what we have to start thinking about. There is no question that a lot of these problems that we have been talking about in terms of the international situation is because we are weak. It's because our Navy is so small. It's because our Air Force is incapable of doing the same things that it did a few years ago. It's because our Marine Corps is not ready to be deployed. There are a lot of problems that are going on, and we need to solve those problems. We need to build up our
Radical
military.
terrorism cannot be solved by intellect. It cannot. They require, what they need is they need an operating space. That's what Afghanistan was for al-Qaeda. It was a vacuum that they filled, and they created an operating space. That's why they had to be drawn out of there. That's why they had to be destroyed. It is the reason why ISIS has now grown as well. We allowed a vacuum to emerge in Syria. They used it as an operating space to grow. And today they're not just in Iraq and Syria anymore. They're now in Libya conducting operations in the Sinai. They're now in Afghanistan trying to supplant the Taliban as the most powerful radical jihadist group on the ground there as well. You cannot allow radical jihadists to have an operating safe haven anywhere in the world.
Governor Huckabee.
Just today there was a new report that 50 different intelligence analysts have said that what they sent up the ladder was doctored by senior officials so that they could give some happy talk to the situation that we face. I love the idea of a good intellectual capacity to deal with our enemies, but the fact is if you don't have good intelligence that's reliable and that's honest, you're not going to have good intelligence and you cannot make good decisions. The next president is primarily elected not just to know things, but to know what to do with the things that he knows. And the most dangerous person in any room is the person who doesn't know what he doesn't know.
Thank you,
and
Governor.
The reason Barack Obama has been dangerous to this country, and we'd better elect someone who has had some executive experience, is because we cannot afford another 8 years having a person in the office who doesn't know what he does not know.
Thank you, Governor. I want to turn to ISIS. Governor Walker.
We
just spent the last 10 minutes.
Governor Walker, there is a big debate right now. We've been talking about ISIS here and there about this in this discussion. There's a big debate right now about whether or not to send more U.S. troops to fight ISIS in Iraq and Syria. In the first debate earlier this evening, Senator Lindsey Graham argued that candidates are only serious about fighting ISIS if they are willing to send 10,000 U.S. troops to Iraq, 10,000 U.S. troops as part of a coalition to Syria. Governor Walker, you just told me a few days ago that the 3,000 U.S. troops there right now are enough as long as the rules of engagement are changed. What do you know that Senator Graham doesn't know?
No, to be clear, what I said the other day was that we need to lift the political restrictions that are already in play. Barack Obama's administration has put political restrictions on the military personnel already in Iraq. We need to lift those, and then we need to listen to our military experts, not the political forces in the White House, but our military experts about how many more we send in. And we certainly shouldn't have a commander-in-chief who sends a message to our adversaries as to how far we're going to go and how far we're willing to fight. So I'm not putting a troop number on. What I'm saying is lift the political restrictions. When you do that, you empower our military personnel already there to work with the Kurd and the Sunni allies to reclaim the territory taken by ISIS, and to do so in a way that allows that ISIS doesn't go back in Syria, as we were just talking about here. That is the fundamental problem going forward. We have a president, and Hillary Clinton, who was a part of this, by the way, who has made political decisions for our men and women in uniform. I want the men and women at home to know, if I am commander-in-chief, I will only send you into harm's way when our national security is at risk. And if we do, you know you'll have our full support, the support of the American people, and you'll have a clear path for victory.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Paul, I want to go to you because you have said that the boots on the ground to fight ISIS need to be Arab boots. We just learned today that despite the Obama administration spending $500 million to help create those Arab boots, there are only 4 or 5 U.S. trained fighters in Syria fighting ISIS. What does that say to you about the effectiveness of the idea of the boots on the ground need to be Arab boots?
If you want boots on the ground and you want them to be our sons and daughters, you got 14 other choices. There will always be a Bush or Clinton for you if you want to go back to war in Iraq. But the thing is, the first war was a mistake, and I'm not sending our sons and our daughters back to Iraq. The war didn't work. We can amplify those who live there. The Kurds deserve to be armed, and I'll arm them. We can use our Air Force to amplify the forces there, but the boots on the ground need to be the people who live there. My goodness, I'm still upset with the Saudi Arabians for everything they do over there. They've funded the arms that went to the jihadists. They're not accepting any of the people, any of the migrants that have been the refugees that are being pushed out of Syria. Saudi Arabia is not accepting one. Why are we always the world's patsies that we have to go over there and fight their wars for them? They need to fight their wars. We need to defend American interests, but it's not in America's national security interest to have another war in Iraq.
We're going to turn to some domestic issues now. I want to bring in my colleague, Dana Bash.
Can I just make one point on this whole military discussion? I called for boots on the ground many months ago in a coalition with our friends who share our interests. You know, you win a battle with the military. And when we go somewhere, we need to be mobile and lethal. We need to take care of business, and we need to come home. But we face also a bigger war. And you win the bigger war with a battle of ideas. You wonder why young people and educated people, rich people, schooled people have tried to join ISIS. Western civilization, all of us need to wake up to the fact that those murderers and rapists need to be called out. And in Western civilization, we need to make it clear that our faith in the Jewish and Christian principles force us to live a life bigger than ourselves, to be sinners in justice, so that we can battle the radicals, call them out for what they are, and make sure that all of our people feel fulfilled in living in Western civilization. This is a giant battle in the world today.
Since everyone has gotten to weigh in on this military issue, I'd like to be able to do the same. We have spent probably 12 minutes talking about the past. Let's talk about the future. We need the strongest military on the face of the planet, and everyone has to know it. And specifically what that means is we need about 50 Army brigades. We need about 36 Marine battalions. We need somewhere between 300 and 350 naval ships. We need to upgrade every leg of the nuclear triad. We need to reform the Department of Defense. We need as well to invest in our military technology.
We're going to turn to domestic issues now
and
with
we
Dana
need to
Bash.
care for our veterans so 307,000 of them aren't dying waiting for health care.
Thank you. Dana Bash.
Governor Bush, let's talk about an issue that's very important to Republican voters, and that's the Supreme Court. After Chief Justice John Roberts voted to uphold Obamacare twice, Senator Cruz criticized your brother for appointing John Roberts to the Supreme Court. Looking back on it, did your brother make a mistake?
Well, I'm surprised Senator Cruz would say that since he was a strong supporter of John Roberts at the time. I will talk about what I will do as President of the United States as it relates to appointing Supreme Court justices. We need to make sure that we have justices that with a proven, experienced record of respect for upholding the Constitution. That is what we need. We can't have the history in recent past is appoint people that have no experience so that you can't get attacked. And that makes it harder for people to have confidence that they won't veer off on decisions.
Is John Roberts one of those people?
John Roberts has made some really good decisions, for sure. But he did not have a proven, extensive record that would have made clarity the important thing. And that's what we need to do. And I'm willing to fight for those nominees to make sure that they get passed. You can't do it the politically expedient way anymore. This is the culture in Washington. You have to fight hard for these appointments. This is perhaps the most important thing that the next president will do.
Do you like what you just heard, Senator Cruz?
Well, Dan, I've known John Roberts for 20 years. He's an amazingly talented lawyer. But yes, it was a mistake when he was appointed to the Supreme Court. He's a good enough lawyer that he knows in these Obamacare cases, he changed the statute, he changed the law in order to force that failed law on millions of Americans for a political outcome. And you know, we're frustrated as conservatives. We keep winning elections, and then we don't get the outcome we wanted. Let me focus on two moments in time. Number one, in 1990, in one room was David Souter, in another room was Edith Jones, the rock-ribbed conservative on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. George Herbert Walker Bush appointed David Souter. And then in 2005, in one room was John Roberts, in another room was my former boss, Mike Ludig, the rock-ribbed conservative on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Thank you, Senator.
George W. Bush appointed John Roberts. And let me give you the consequences of that. If instead the President Bushes had appointed Edith Jones and Mike Ludig, which is who I would have appointed, Obamacare would have been struck down 3 years ago, and the marriage laws of all 50 states would be on the books. These matter, and I've fought to defend the Constitution my whole life, and
Governor
I will
Bush,
as president as well.
I want to let you respond.
Well, first of all, as I said, he supported John Roberts. He supported him publicly. So you can rewrite history, I guess, Ted, but the simple fact is that you supported him because he had all the criteria that you would have thought would have made a great justice. And I think he is doing a good job. But the simple fact is, going forward, what we need to do is to have someone that has a long-standing set of rulings that consistently makes it clear that he is focused exclusively on upholding the Constitution of the United States, that they won't try to use the bench as a means by which to legislate. And that's what we should do.
Thank you,
I hope I'll be working with members of the United States Senate to fight hard for the passage of people that have that kind of qualification.
Senator Cruz, 30 seconds.
It is true that after George W. Bush nominated John Roberts, I supported his confirmation. That was a mistake, and I regret that. I wouldn't have nominated John Roberts, and indeed, Governor Bush pointed out why. It wasn't that the President Bushes wanted to appoint a liberal to the court. It's that it was the easier choice. Both David Souter and John Roberts, they didn't have a long paper trail. If you'd nominated Edith Jones or Mike Ludig, you would have had a bloody fight, and they weren't willing to spend political capital to put a strong judicial conservative on the court. I have spent my entire life, starting from clerking for Chief Justice William Rehnquist on the United States Supreme Court, one of the most principled jurists. We have an out-of-control court, and I give you my word. If I'm elected president, every single Supreme Court justice will faithfully follow the law and will not act like philosopher kings imposing their liberal policies on millions of Americans who need to be trusted to govern ourselves.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Huckabee, I want to bring you in very quickly, if you could. will you have a litmus test when it comes to appointing Supreme Court nominees?
You better believe I will, because I'm tired of liberals always having a litmus test and conservatives are supposed to pretend we don't. Well, let me tell you what mine would be. Number one, I'd ask, do you think that the unborn child is a human being or is it just a blob of tissue? I'd want to know the answer to that. I'd want to know, do you believe in the First Amendment? Do you believe that religious liberty is the fundamental liberty around which all the other freedoms of this country are based? And I'd want to know, do you really believe in the Second Amendment? Do you believe that we have an individual right to bear arms, to protect ourselves and our family, and to protect our country? And do you believe in the Fifth and the 14th Amendment? Do you believe that a person, before they're deprived of life and liberty, should in fact have due process and equal protection under the law? Because if you do, you're going to do more than defund Planned Parenthood. One final thing. I'd make darn sure that we absolutely believe the 10th Amendment. Every governor on this stage would